e que agora estejam preparados e prontos para nós aprofundarmos o nosso tema ainda mais, né? I hope that you really enjoyed your lunch. I hope that it was refreshing and delicious, hopefully, and that you are ready now to dig even deeper into this wonderful theme that we have today. And we have another wonderful panel of very, very interesting ladies for you. So vamos agora prosseguir com o nosso painel intitulado Mulheres no Poder, Poder, Política e Recursos. Para discutir este tema, por favor, deem as boas-vindas às nossas painelistas, que são Honorable Kanisile Chabalala Litchfield, please, we met her earlier on, and I have to mention that she is a distinguished member of the African Parliamentary Network on Illicit Financial Flows and Tax. A warm welcome back to Honorable Kanisile, please. I would also like to call Edna Kanyunga, an experienced member of parliament from Zambia with a significant focus on economic policy, politic finance and debt management. Edna Kanguya, got it right this time. And also a very warm welcome to Mam Diarandia Isobel, a prominent activist in the Stop the Bleeding campaign, which aims to address the detrimental effects of illicit financial flows on African economies. Warm welcome for Mam Diara. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome back on stage Professor Tia Waris, UN independent expert on foreign debt and human rights. Welcome back. Again, I feel absolutely privileged to be here with you. So we're going to have a very interesting discussion. Around about 1 minute, I'll be asking you 2 questions each, and after that, we'll be going to you, the audience, for some questions. And I would like to start with you, Professor Atia. So from the keynote this morning, there was an emphasis on the integration of feminist principles in how we look at debt and finance. I would like to know, what are the pathways in using yours and other UN independent expert mandates to move this forward? Tiny question. Podemos conectar o microfone? Ça ne marche pas.
Thank you. Merci. Yes, of course I didn't expect you to ask us easy questions. We also have to wake everybody up after the fabulous lunch, so please wake up. Yes. There are numerous ways you can bring a feminist way of thinking into the conversations. So many of the rapporteurs do 2 reports a year. One to the Human Rights Council, which tends to be a much easier space because the rapporteurs are actually housed within the Human Rights Council. The second report that many of them do is to the General Assembly. Now, the General Assembly tends to be the place where there is a more difficult engagement, as it were, to bringing human rights into the space. And so that is really where it would be of great benefit, for example, to the rapporteurs, to have more civil society engagement with the reports that are submitted to the General Assembly as opposed to the Human Rights Council, because there's this lack of balance between the 2 spaces. The second thing that I think is an important trajectory to put the conversation forward is there has been this traditional siloing of feminism under, the rapporteur on violence against women, for example, the working group on gender, right? But for people like me who do work on feminist issues and who are always trying to push those inequality issues forward, it's important to have these conversations happening across all the mandates. And so if there is more engagement, not only by civil society, but of course by the political class, by the diplomatic class, to push these conversations forward, it becomes very important as well there. So these would be the first ones I would talk about initially. But there is this third tool in my toolbox, which all the rapporteurs have, which is this correspondence with world leaders. And I think the correspondence with world leaders is the one that can really be utilized. So mandates like mine traditionally don't even receive allegation letters, for example. So when there was, for example, gender strategy being rolled out at the IMF level, I contributed to that, but of my own accord. What would be really useful would be to push other mandate holders, not necessarily the one working on debt, but even the one working on water or housing, right? And getting that conversation pushed forward in these other spaces. So there are conversation points that you can start, and there are conversation points that can be pushed. And I think the reason I think these are important is because of the impact. One doesn't see the impact of rapporteurs in very public ways. But what we do is we push the envelope behind the scenes, and we add to the existing pressure. And so that, I think, is where the biggest value add is as well.
Just very quickly, actually, just to make sure that everybody understands what a rapporteur is, yes. Would you mind telling us?
Yes, not at all. You're giving me more time to talk, so I hope you're ready for it. So there are two phrases that are used. It's either independent expert or special rapporteur. There is no difference between the two terms. The Human Rights Council, based on propositions by member states, creates positions that they believe, as the Human Rights Council, are topical areas of importance for the world. So over the years, different topics have come forward. So we have rapporteurs on health, we have a rapporteur on water, on housing, and in my case, a rapporteur on foreign debt and international financial obligations. Now, the rapporteurs are volunteers. We are not members of staff of the United Nations. We remain housed in our home institutions, at our universities, or wherever we are operating from. And what we do is we volunteer our time by producing reports that we feel are topics of global importance. And so we are always trying to look forward at issues that are coming up in future, and at the same time deal with current or problematic issues. So when there was the problem in Sri Lanka, I was writing letters. When there was a problem in Zambia, I was writing letters to the IMF. So we're there pushing those arguments wherever we can in different ways in order to try and highlight them as well. It's a double-edged sword because we are unpaid, and so the presumption is that we are unbiased. But because we are unpaid, we also don't produce as much as we could have, perhaps, if we had the support. So it has different connotations. And so we do four things. We do these thematic reports. We do what are called country visits. So by invitation of government or by our own accord, we will request to go into a country where we feel is important. So for example, this year I was in Angola already, and last year I was in the Bahamas. And in addition to that, we do these letters where we try to push the conversation. And the one that I think is of great importance to Africa is that last year, there was the rising number of countries that were going to be paying what are called surcharges. So if you default on paying your 1% interest rate, by 2025, 14 countries around the world were going to pay a 3% interest rate. Now, it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make logical sense, right? Like, if I can't pay 1%, how am I going to pay 3% in 2 years' time? I'm still going to default, but now my default will be on a higher figure. And so what I did was I actually wrote a letter to the head of the IMF, and I asked her what was the logic of putting in a clause like that, where if you default, you pay a higher interest rate. And they finally did write back a year later. But what really saddened me is that instead of 14 countries, there are now 22 countries on that list. So countries like Zambia and Egypt on the continent, but then Jordan, Pakistan, and then Ukraine, which is at war, and then across in Latin America, Argentina. And if you hear the names of the countries I give you, they don't make logical sense, right? They're not similar economies. They don't have similar sizes. So why are they attracting this particular penalty? So this is the sort of stuff we try and highlight, at least from the perspective of my mandate.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's incredibly commendable, and especially that you are doing it from your own, accord and time. And I can't even imagine the amount of energy that goes into it. And but it's definitely worth it by the sound of it. And I have another question for you. Actually, I would like to ask you: how do human rights and feminist principles intersect? I know that we've brushed this topic since the beginning of the day, but what is your take on this question?
So, from my understanding, I would replace human rights with raising living standards. So, human rights principles are about raising living standards. But feminist principles are about reducing the inequality. So in one case, it's about sort of bringing the bottom up and reducing vulnerabilities across the board. Whereas for me, it's about looking now within the human being spectrum of different humans and then sort of leveling the playing field within them and between them rather than from the bottom up. So this is for me where I see the greatest power of feminism in pushing the boundaries of inequality across the board.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. We'll have a chance, I'm sure, to hear more from you when we'll take questions from the audience. I would like to turn to you now, Dr. Kanisile. So during your artistic and beautiful presentation earlier on, you had us all raving this morning on the erased and forgotten women in our struggle. How should politics and politicians, especially women politicians, be reminded of this unforgivable action? And how do we ensure that there is a continuation of the cancellation of women, that there isn't a continuation of the cancellation of women in the liberation that was mentioned in the keynote? So it's like a double question there. So how can we make sure that we remember and we never get erased again?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very loaded question because it's not going to be an issue of women only. It's a societal issue. I think for me, what stands out is it wasn't a mistake that women were erased. So I think the first thing women should ask is why? Why targeting women? Because African men were left in the history books. So when that happens, I automatically just say, okay, so there is something about women in terms of power and politics and resources that contradicted the colonial script. So, and then you go and you dig and you say, okay, what was it? And I think from the women that were shared for me this morning, and I mean, we didn't share all of them, you just see that one, these were women who were grounded in their spirituality and culture. And that's where they drew their strength from. So how do we make sure the current women do not forget? Firstly, they need to know. Like I said, until I was a teenager, I truly believed that patriarchy was African and that it is synonymous with our culture. So we had a slogan back in apartheid at school. COSAS was the Congress of South African Students. There was no cell phone or phone, but we still had to organize. So we had a slogan, each one, teach one. So I think the women that have come to know, the women that are here, the women that are parliamentarians, the women that are leading, you have a responsibility to keep telling the stories of women. Two, we need to write. But then again, I was talking to Crystal, and our very brilliant morning presenter this morning, that it's hard to even attract funding as a woman writer because self-publication is expensive. Like these women are in a book I've written, and I can tell you the people who gave me the highest rights to my book, if I don't self-publish, is University of South Africa, but they're giving me 13%. And they told me up front, we give the highest because you are given 6% over the rights of your book. So we need to write. Three, we need to invest in women leadership. Because I know people complain, especially in South Africa, they say it's always about the girl child. We have August, which is a women's month. There are women activities. They say there is no men's month. But I say women already move from a minus. You know, when you put a woman in leadership, they have to first prove that they can make it. 2, they have to prove they didn't sleep with anybody to get where they are. 3, they have to prove that they are not a token, you know, that they have earned to be there. So we need to invest more in women leadership for me. How do you ensure it does not perpetuate? It is a collective thing. And I think it's not just women. African history is not written by Africans. It defies logic for me to see that we have continued the perpetuation, and it is tied to these divisions of Lusophone, Anglophone, and Francophone. So everything from the Francophone is mainly written from Paris. If you look at the education system and the writers, it's French writers, Belgian, maybe because there's French too. If you look at ours, it's more your Canada, Britain, Australia. You look at the Lusophone, speak to the Portuguese, it's mainly Portuguese writers, that would be Portugal. So until we also decolonize the education system itself, you know, women, we can try, we can keep trying and have conferences like this and keep each one teach one, but at the end of the day, this needs to be mainstream historical knowledge. Because if you have a girl child who's 15 and their hero is Patrice Lumumba, it's fine and he should, but it shouldn't be the sum total. Their hero is Kwame Nkrumah, but they do not know of Oko, the woman who designed the flag. They don't know Salome. You know, their hero is Steve Biko, but they don't realize, okay, but Winnie Madikizela Mandela was actually even more popular than Steve Biko, you know? So if we don't balance the equation at education level, then we are not going to get it right. Especially for parliamentarians. I will tell you that the party system is what works for parliamentarians. She'll talk more about it because we spoke before. But like, I'll give you a quick example with me. When I joined a certain party, I will not mention, I'm sure people know which party it is. We were first time in parliament. So we hadn't had an elective conference. When we went to the elective conference and people wanted me to stand as deputy president, the top 6 at the time actually sent people to me to tell me not to stand, to beg me not to stand and to tell me, if you stand, it's unparty-like. You know, the party does not want you to stand. Now, when we start talking about how the erasure happened, it's power, it's politics, it's resources. And the politics for me is this bastardized African culture. They don't want you to stand because they've looked at you and they've decided as men, we need to be the top 4, you know? And then women follow. If it's a top 10 in a party, you get women at number 7 or 8 or 9. So I think I'll answer you up to this far on that one.
Absolutely, and once, you know, and as we're talking about, you know, the parliamentary, you as the chair of the African Parliamentary Network on Illicit Financial Flows and Tax, how can we ensure, in fact, that women and feminist perspectives are mainstreamed?
Let's start with the body of knowledge. There is very little investment in illicit financial flows and feminism. Mm-hmm. The mainstream still says IFF affects Africans, the same. There's very little focused on taxation and feminism. How do the various tax systems affect us? You know, I always say most households in Africa, single-headed households, are women-led, not men-led. Now, how do you take a woman who is a middle manager, single-headed household, feeding 7 children, how do you tax her equally? Like the same woman in the same tax bracket, but who is married with a man who maybe sometimes is in the same level and they have 2 incomes. You understand? We have not disaggregated because the issue of taxation and feminism looks at the intersectionality and how it affects women. So we haven't done that. But 3, women themselves, because we erased them, women look up to men. That's number 4. Women themselves are the ones who vote for men against women. It's a painful thing to look at. And money always wins. In Winnie's case, it was not money. She would have been the first president in South Africa. For her, it was money in a way, but it was more the media and the resources and the power. You know, white monopoly capital had the power to make sure. And the first thing they did was to run that divorce. because Mandela announced that divorce on a Thursday, and on Friday he moved in with the Rothschild, the Rockefellers, and the Oppenheimers and lived with them. So throughout the negotiation, that's where he was living. So remove him from this powerful woman who will look at these policies and say, this is not what we fought for, they are an African. But for you to do that, bastardize this woman, which is what they did. So as long as the power, the resources, and the politics are not disrupted, you'll keep having this. You look at Nkosazana Zuma, how did he lose it? Money flew in black bags, the ANC themselves tell you. They say we went there as a united force as women, this is what we are voting for, is our woman candidate. But when money started flying in black bags, when you wake up the following day, you see women themselves are speaking a different language. They are no longer with you, now they are supporting a male candidate. So it's very difficult. I think in Uplift, that's why we are now trying to partner with Akina Mama, with various other organizations to say, can we focus on women leadership specifically of MPs? And I made a few notes here and I said, you know, if we do not know our history as women, we become self-conscious. So I've become what I call a disruptor. I try and not fit into the mainstream, and I'm very proud of it. Because Njinga Mbande was a disruptor. This woman lived for 85 years, 70 of which she was in the struggle against Portuguese incursion and slavery. I mean, she lost the whole kingdom. She lost Ndongo. And then she rebuilt the kingdom through Matamba. Most people say we don't like what she did because she killed the Queen of Matamba to take it over. Again, a disruptor. The Queen of Matamba was doing nothing with that kingdom. She wasn't helping in the struggle, and the Portuguese would actually have made that an enclave. She decided, I'll take that over. So if women do not have such role models, Asantewa, she understood what was at stake. So the women who voted, for instance, for Cyril over Nkosazana Zuma didn't sit down and say, what is at stake for our country at this juncture? And I mean, they killed us, they nailed, because Cyril is the worst president we have ever had in South Africa. We say it always. She is the worst of them all. But we had a better candidate who was a woman. So those women didn't understand, like, Asantewa, what was at stake. Asantewa was just like, if they capture the golden stool, we are doomed, we are done. So with every ounce of our breath, we need to fight to protect the golden stool. You look at the story of Saronia. Saronia was just like, if I allow them to strip me naked in the square and guillotine me in front of my people, I've nailed the head, they will be defeated. Because the Azna people had refused conversion to Islam. They refused conversion to Christianity. So she was like, how do I leave a lasting legacy? Okay, I will use shape-shifting. So she understood what was at stake. To date in Niger, the Nazna people are in African spirituality. So I think for me, if you don't understand the women who walked before you, you keep role modeling against men. And in our culture and spirituality, the feminine and the masculine power work differently. You need both. But at the moment, we've been given masculinity as a power. So you need to have the ability and know the ability to tap into the feminine power. Then you will make it in parliament. Because otherwise, it is a predominant male space.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And I love how you said, you know, we really need both energies. It's never, never men against women. Those energies should really work together. And truly and really, women will rise when men collaborate as well. And I really like also the importance of having the right role models. So thank you very much. A lot of food for thoughts, I'm sure, for our audience. I would like to turn to you, Edna. To what extent do you observe women in positions of decision-making on allocation of resources? And how do you see this as a contribution towards the economic challenges like that the continent faces?
Thank you very much. First of all, Madam Moderator, thank you for elevating me to a status of an honorable. I work at the Zambian Parliament in the Parliamentary Budget Office, and we provide technical support to honorable members on issues to do with budget and public finance in general. I would like to start off this discussion by stating that gender equality in political power is essential for achieving economic justice as well as sustainable development. And this is warranted because of the reality that in SADC region, but also in Africa as a continent, women constitute a significant portion of the population, but it is regrettable that they continue to be underrepresented in key decision making and also in allocation of resources. But there's a context to this. This issue is quite historic because from a historic perspective, men have always dominated or centered around power. And this issue has kind of marginalized women, and also it has implications on how resources are allocated, because resources continue to be skewed towards men because they are kind of elite. And women, in terms of inequality, continues to be widened. But what does this mean? Women hold less than 30% of parliamentary seats in most parliaments in Africa. Therefore, resource allocation is about the game of numbers. Where there are no numbers, there's no voice for a woman. And there's no power without resources. I might state that. It's arguably, but I think that it's a fact, that there's no power without resources, because a woman should prove that they have resources, but they also have capacity. But a man can just prove that they have the money, and they'll be given a position. And like Honorable said, a woman must prove that they didn't sleep with anyone for them to be given that position. It's very unrealistic, and I think that the people in here today should join all the feminists in here in supporting women in taking up these positions, but also ensuring that there's a voice that is advocating for equitable distribution of resources. But what does this mean when we have 30% of women taking up these seats? It means that it affects their influence on policies and also resource allocation. It means that in plenary, where critical decisions are made, where legislation is passed and budgets are approved, there's a missing voice for women. Imagine having less than 30% in parliament and key decisions that impact women are being made. The men will not remember us. So what does that mean? It means that even in parliamentary committees, which are the engine of parliamentary oversight, the women are missing. Where critical decisions are being made in terms of, because there's a critical perspective that women bring in terms of the discourse where resource allocation is concerned. Women will speak out for eliminating or eradicating menstrual poverty. Women will speak out in advancing sexual and reproductive health rights. Women will speak out where it concerns allocating resources to retain girls who have fallen out of pregnancy. Therefore, this discussion we're having today is warranted because of the realities that we're living in, where women continue to be marginalized and because of their lack of representation. But to go to the last part of the question, I would like to stress that we need to define what resources are. And when we understand what constitutes these resources, then we'll understand what resources we're distributing. Outside the conventional budget, where resources mean money, when we talk about gender inequality or the lack thereof, we're talking about women having access to resources such as land, but above all having influence towards how these resources are distributed. Women's contribution to the economy, particularly in the informal sector, remains undervalued. But also, even the work that they perform in a home sometimes is unpaid, and it also limits their economic power. And data on ownership of land and also access to resources shows that women are marginalized and do not have access to these resources. And without these resources, that means that they remain economically unempowered, and also they cannot stand at the same place with men fighting for the same positions. And this is the reality we have today. So it means that for us to achieve gender equality, we must have equal voices with the men. We must speak for ourselves and not let the men speak for us, because they may not really understand the impact of what those resources are aimed at driving at.
Thank you very much. You know what's interesting as well? I'm thinking that we are talking about limited or unequal access to resources for women, and studies actually show that women are better managers of resources when they get them. They're better borrowers when it comes to banks, We know that when women have wealth, the whole community benefits because they make sure that the children go to school, that everybody's fed, the extended family. So it's very interesting to me that resources are kept from potentially those who could amplify them more. So Edna, going back to you, you've mentioned quite a few issues there, and what can be done to you think to address the situation, and really where should we start?
Okay, I think what can be done first of all is to adopt a gender-sensitive approach to political power, but also to how resources are distributed. Then it is also important to integrate women's perspective in political processes for equitable development. And this means actively involving women, not only in policy making, but where it matters most, when resources are being distributed. But it should not end at resource distribution. It should go as far as tracking expenditure to ensure that expenditure outcomes have an impact on what we want to achieve, which is narrowing the gender inequality situation that we are faced with. I also think that it's important that we should embrace inclusive electoral systems. I think that it's too much to expect that gender representation will be achieved at the parliamentary level. It should start from a political party system where women are given spaces to participate. And I would want to call a political party as a midwife, because they give birth to what we see in parliament. If at the time of adoption in political parties, women are marginalized, they're excluded, that means that it's a dream to expect that you would have a 50-50 representation in parliament if this is not done at political party level. Therefore, political parties have a role to play, in fact, a big role in ensuring that women are given this opportunity to be represented in key decision spaces. The other situation is, the other recommendation I would like to give is, in countries where political parties are funded by public resources, the outcomes of these political parties should be tied to gender. That means that political parties should be incentivized to ensure that there's a gender outcome tied to them accessing public resources. It should be a prerequisite for them to access public resources if they're able to demonstrate that in the political party system, they've created platforms or portfolios for women to be nominated or adopted to stand in key decision-making positions such as constituencies or local government institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before going to you, Mam Diarra, I saw that you were agreeing with some of the things that Edna just shared. So I would like to quickly go back to you. I'll start with you, Professor. What did you think about what we've heard and the role of political parties?
So while she was speaking, there were two things that occurred to me. The first is it has a lot to do with intention. So when you talk about who's the better manager of money, although we're making, a generalization that the gender actually is that way, the problem with that is then you ask yourself, then why isn't that happening? And it's because of the intention of those that actually control the resources. And I like to use a phrase. I usually say rights require resources, but I also say resources, that are the human being, require rights. And so it's a two-way street. But you actually don't see it unpacking itself. And I'm going to take advantage, sorry. But I actually did research on political party campaign financing some years ago. And it was based in Kenya. But one of the things that I noticed immediately, which was an accidental finding of my report, but it wasn't put in as a conclusion, was that there is less funding given to women in political parties for their campaign financing. So it's not even that you have the budget allocation in government, which is in most countries, there is a budget allocation for the political parties who've won based on the number of seats they won in the previous election. But what you also have is then within the party, you will have better money or higher amounts of money being given to the male members of the parliament who are going to now go for campaign financing vis-a-vis the women, which means that maybe the woman will have a poster or a banner somewhere, but the man will have TV slots. So that also affects the ability of the woman to get into parliament because resources have to be managed. So, yes.
It's fascinating. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your research. You were there, you actually searched it, so we're not getting second-hand data. Thank you very much. That's fascinating. And Doctor, please, what are your thoughts?
I think she hit the nail on the head. I always say, apart from training the MPs who come to Uplift, because they come as volunteers, they're not sent by their party or parliament. But when they go back, the party line still keeps them in check. So it depends if they are disruptors like me for them to continue the agenda. But if we targeted the political parties, it would make so much difference. If it is the party line that illicit financial flows and taxation or issues of feminism or issues of debt are on the table, if all of those issues have a feminist perspective, then it's easy for that Uplift MP to champion the cause, because then they are not going against the party line. But then again, there is a little thing that's not palatable there for most CSOs. They will say, oh, if I go and I train a political party, it looks like I'm taking a side. And then if you say, I'll get all the top 6 or top 7 of all political parties in one room so it doesn't look like you favored, then it's hard for political parties to come under one room and tackle the issues, because sometimes the opposition say, the ruling party, you know, when issues are being discussed, we've tried it in South Africa, they say, you are the cause of this. So I think it's a thin line, but however you will look at it, it goes back to the political system. It has to start there, because what the political party system produces is the caliber of who then becomes your national assembly or your regional assembly or your local. It comes from the party. And if, I think as voters, if you have voted for a party and they give you your top 10 and they're all men, you should show your toys in the air and ask what is wrong. But voters don't do that. So for me, there's also an element of voter responsibility there. I think I'll leave it here for now.
Thank you very much. Je me tourne à présent vers vous, Mme Diarra. Vous voulez qu'on continue en français ou... Oui? Parfait, parfait. Alors nous allons parler de Stop the Bleeding Campaign. Et j'aime beaucoup, avant de vous poser ma première question, j'aime beaucoup cette image de Stop the Bleeding. Parce que c'est vrai qu'on parle de flux, on parle de ressources, mais il y a de la souffrance qui finalement découle de ces travers. Alors j'aimerais vous demander, eh bien, d'abord de revenir un petit peu sur les grandes lignes de cette campagne, nous expliquer un petit peu à quoi elle correspond, et également comment eh bien, la campagne Stop the Bleeding devrait finalement se positionner pour mobiliser la population à adopter une approche et une perspective féministe sur la question de la dette.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice, et félicitations. Permettez-moi d'abord de saluer nos distingués participants et participantes en leur rang, grade et qualité, de féliciter AfCoDD et toutes les personnes qui sont impliquées dans l'organisation de cette conférence et de rendre hommage à toutes les femmes. Peut-être on va donner un petit moment pour que les gens puissent...
Dá para fazer a tradução de francês para o português ou inglês? É possível? Sim, está funcionando. Ok. Ça va, ça marche maintenant. Obrigada. Normalement, c'est bon.
C'est bon?
C'est bon? C'est bon? Ouais, ça y est.
Merci beaucoup. J'étais juste en train de féliciter les instigateurs de cette conférence et je voulais rendre hommage à toutes les femmes qui sont dans cette salle et à tous les hommes qui admettent et acceptent les valeurs du féminisme. Pour revenir à la campagne Stop the Bleeding, c'est une belle image, une image d'hémorragie. Est-ce que c'est bon? C'est bon? Oui. La campagne, c'est une image d'hémorragie. À la fois quelque chose qu'on perd de précieux. C'est toujours dangereux de perdre du sang, ça peut mourir, ça étouffe. Et toutes les ressources que le continent africain est en train de perdre est en train de tuer le continent, est en train d'étouffer le continent, est en train de priver le continent de cet oxygène que sont les ressources. Parce que sans satisfaction de besoins de base et de dignité et d'indépendance sociale et économique, on ne peut pas vivre, on ne peut pas être à l'aise, on ne peut pas être confortable. Et l'image de Stop le Bleeding, arrêter l'hémorragie, on ne pouvait pas trouver mieux pour imager toutes ces ressources que le continent est en train de perdre. Donc, naturellement, le principe de la campagne Stop the Bleeding, c'est de capitaliser sur la mobilisation des ressources au niveau du continent. En quoi faisant? En essayant de retenir ce que nous sommes en train de perdre. Et quelles sont les poches qui fuient? D'habitude, c'est relatif à la fiscalité, la fuite des impôts, la fuite des capitaux, toute cette fiscalité, toutes ces taxes que les grandes institutions ne payent pas, ou bien même toute cette fiscalité au niveau national qui n'est pas bien gérée. C'est les flux financiers illicites que nous sommes en train de perdre. C'est le service de la dette qui est en train qui constitue des goulots d'étranglement pour le continent. Et donc, le Stop the Bleeding est en train de s'adresser à tous ces enjeux-là de façon holistique et transversale. J'en profite pour féliciter les organisations initiateurs et l'année prochaine, je pense, ça sera la célébration des 10 ans de la campagne de Stop the Bleeding, qui sera certainement une belle renaissance. Et en revenant à votre question, à savoir comment la campagne peut mobiliser les populations autour d'une approche féministe. Et je pense que pour faire adhérer quelqu'un à quelque chose, il faut que cette personne-là puisse croire et comprendre de quoi il s'agit. Donc, au niveau de la campagne, nous avons un mandat d'information, un mandat de formation et un mandat de renforcement des capacités. Mais aussi un mandat de plaidoyer et d'influence. Et ce n'est pas pour rien qu'aujourd'hui, cette conférence si importante pour le continent africain soit menée vers une approche féministe. Et j'en profite pour féliciter des organisations telles que Femnet et Nawi qui sont en train d'assurer cette approche féministe-là au sein de la campagne. Donc, mais il faut aussi que les populations, les communautés, les citoyens, mais aussi les gouvernements puissent se retrouver à la notion de féminisme. Que les communautés africaines puissent se retrouver à la notion de féminisme que nous leur présentons. Comment cela impacte dans leur vie, comment cela impacte dans leurs économies et comment cela impacte dans leurs notions. En faisant référence au pouvoir économique, au pouvoir d'accès aux ressources et même au pouvoir d'égalité. Et donc, nous avons effectivement un travail de mobilisation à faire à ce niveau. J'ai un exemple, par exemple, l'exemple de la campagne des 30%, qui n'a pas été initiée par le Stop the Bleeding, mais qui regroupe beaucoup de parties prenantes aujourd'hui qui se retrouvent au sein de la campagne. Et il s'agit de mobiliser les ressources issues des ressources extractives pour voir comment cela peut aider à investir sur l'autonomisation économique des femmes. En parlant d'autonomisation, on parle ici de renforcement de pouvoir économique et pas le petit système économique là qui maintient les femmes dans le niveau de pauvreté, mais aussi à l'éducation des filles. Parce que ça, c'est une approche féministe qui prépare les institutions, les femmes et toutes les parties prenantes à une implication des femmes dans la longue durée. Quand les filles sont éduquées et formées, et quand les femmes sont éduquées et formées avec une capacité de participation économique à grande échelle.
et non pas seulement à un semblant de participation économique. Par exemple, quand on évalue le système de microcrédit, on voit que pendant des décennies, nous travaillons dans le microcrédit, mais quand on va dans toutes ces communautés-là, où les microcrédits et certains mécanismes de génération de revenus des ressources, les femmes n'ont pas eu une amélioration économique marquante. Donc, comment, à travers l'architecture financière africaine, les femmes peuvent accéder à l'économie à grande échelle, aussi bien au niveau communautaire, mais aussi au niveau plus large national. Je pense que si la campagne adopte cette approche-là, et c'est ce qui est en train de se faire, les populations, les citoyens vont se retrouver au niveau du concept de la campagne. Et ceci va être évidemment accompagné par un renforcement de capacité des parties prenantes.
Merci beaucoup. Et ça me fait penser, c'est vrai, hein, que même au niveau politique, parlementaire, peut-être que le nombre de femmes augmente, mais est-ce qu'elles sont vraiment à des postes de décideurs? Est-ce qu'elles ont vraiment les plus gros portfolios? Ceux qui allouent les ressources, c'est vrai qu'il reste encore énormément de travail. Merci beaucoup. Alors, c'est vrai que vous êtes très modeste par rapport à la campagne Stop the Bleeding, mais est-ce que vous pourriez quand même partager avec nous certaines des belles avancées que vous avez pu effectuer? Est-ce qu'il y a un exemple ou deux qui vous viennent en tête pour nous donner un petit peu une idée de l'ampleur du travail que vous faites?
Je pense qu'actuellement, un progrès marquant de la campagne Stop the Bleeding est la capacité fédératrice actuellement qu'a la campagne. Le fait de rassembler ce que j'appelle les de grandes organisations africaines avec des valeurs panafricaines qui sont ensemble pour travailler vers une perspective commune et harmonisée. Ça déjà, c'est une grande avancée. Et l'influence institutionnelle aussi de la campagne. Le fait que le Stop the Bleeding puisse participer à des instances de négociation internationales et influencer les mécanismes de l'architecture économique relative à la dette, à la mobilisation des ressources et aux flux financiers illicites, ça aussi, ce sont des avancées. Et non pas seulement des avancées institutionnelles, mais la valeur ajoutée et l'innovation, c'est l'aspect transversal qui fait que des institutions et des organisations de grande envergure puissent travailler en collaboration avec des communautés pour pouvoir définir une vision commune de l'économie africaine. Par exemple, le mois passé, on a organisé ce qu'on appelle le STB Citizen Forum, le forum citoyen de la campagne Stop the Bleeding. Et nous avons pu réunir les communautés de base, les organisations au niveau local, les chefs traditionnels, mais aussi les parlementaires pour créer un cadre de dialogue. Et cela va nous permettre de définir des solutions et de proposer des recommandations qui vont partir de la base vers le sommet, au lieu de définir des mécanismes au niveau du sommet pour pouvoir appliquer de façon parfois inadéquate aux besoins des populations. Et ça, c'est de belles avancées qu'est la campagne. Et au bout de 10 ans d'existence, la mobilisation, mais aussi la sensibilisation et la popularisation de notions de la dette au niveau des communautés. Et la participation des populations et des citoyens dans la formulation des réponses stratégiques. Ça, je pense que c'est de belles avancées de progrès que le Stop the Bleeding est en train de réaliser.
Donc des champions finalement de la persuasion, du plaidoyer. Mais parlez-nous un petit peu des leviers essentiels justement pour mobiliser un maximum de militants à cette cause. Quels sont-ils?
Les leviers principaux que nous avons sont naturellement les organisations qui constituent la campagne. La campagne tourne autour d'un consortium d'organisations avec des bases communautaires très fortes. On n'a pas besoin de réinventer la roue, il faut juste capitaliser sur cette valeur communautaire-là, le trésor que nous avons au niveau des communautés. Les organisations de base, les organisations de la société civile au niveau communautaire et au niveau national qui sont déjà engagées dans les réformes financières du continent. Et ça, c'est un levier très important. Maintenant, il s'agira de les harmoniser, de voir comment on pourra formuler des stratégies communes en tenant en compte les aspects et les réalités sociales et politiques de chaque région ou bien de chaque pays. Ça aussi, ça constitue des défis que la campagne aura à relever parce que tout ne sera pas facile, tout n'est pas facile. Quand on essaie de mettre ensemble des pays et des organisations de réalités socio-économiques différentes, mais aussi de régions géopolitiques un peu différentes.
Merci beaucoup. C'est vrai de mentionner, on parle d'Afrique, mais chaque région est tellement différente, même au sein d'un même pays, on en sait quelque chose. Alors, je suis sûre qu'il y a des questions dans la salle. Madame, s'il vous plaît. I know you speak both English and French, so please stand up, ask your question, and possibly to whom it is addressed. Thank you. Can someone... Oh, yes.
I think I'm going to use this one. Merci beaucoup. Ma première question est à Madame Diaré. Pardon pour la prononciation. En fait, comme la modératrice disait, il y a dans les différentes régions en Afrique, on n'a pas cette genre de conversation beaucoup plus dans les pays francophones en Afrique. Je vois beaucoup plus en Afrique du Sud. Ok, je vois beaucoup plus en Afrique du Sud. On a cette genre de conversation en Afrique de l'Ouest. Mais je prends l'Afrique centrale, ou les pays francophones, on n'a pas beaucoup ce genre de conversation. Et comment est-ce qu'on peut faire pour avoir cette genre de conversation pour impacter, pour que peut-être avec votre campagne sur Stop the Bleeding, qu'ils comprennent que c'est nécessaire et c'est important. And my second question, oh, he can hear me, okay. Oh, maybe I can just ask it in English if...
Non, on peut pas vous entendre.
Okay, thank you. I think this way is better. En fait, c'était ça ma question. Comment est-ce que les autres pays francophones peuvent rejoindre les autres régions à vraiment avoir ce genre de conversation? Parce que je pense qu'on manque ce genre de conversation dans les pays francophones. Par exemple, je suis au Sénégal, vous êtes sénégalais, vous avez ce genre de conversation peut-être au Togo. S'il y a les Béninois dans la salle, s'ils ont ce genre de conversation déjà. Et j'ai une deuxième question. I have a second question that goes to Doctor. So, sorry, I wrote them down, so I don't want to lose track. Sorry, guys. So, what are the main barriers that still prevent women from reaching the highest level of power in Africa, in African government and institutions? So, how can these barriers be effectively addressed to create a more equitable distributions of power? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Non, c'est OK. Fonctionne? Ça marche? OK. Donc, deux questions très, très intéressantes. On va peut-être commencer par vous. Mme Diarra.
Merci beaucoup, ma sœur, pour la question. C'est vrai que d'habitude, quand on est dans une assemblée pareille, chacun dit pourquoi nous n'avons pas une telle conversation dans mon pays ou bien dans ma zone régionale. Mais ce qui se passe, c'est que je pense que chaque pays, dans chaque région, il y a des conversations sur ces sujets très palpitants et très intéressantes. Le défi que nous avons, c'est de les amener ensemble. Et je pense qu'aujourd'hui, quand vous voyez la salle, il y a une forte représentation de pays francophones et une forte représentation de pays anglophones et de pays lusophones. Et ceci fait partie des mandats de la campagne Stop the Bleeding, de mettre les parties prenantes et les acteurs ensemble. Actuellement, si vous voyez, par exemple, en Afrique de l'Ouest, ils ont un réseau très fort, que ce soit un réseau de la société civile ou bien un réseau parlementaire qui travaille sur les questions de la dette, des flux financiers illicites et de la mobilisation domestique des ressources. Malheureusement, le président du réseau ouest-africain sur la mobilisation domestique des ressources n'a pas pu arriver, mais ils sont en train de faire un travail extraordinaire sur le sujet. Et quand vous prenez les autres régions ici, vous voyez ce que AfCoDD, ce que TGN, le réseau sur la justice fiscale, est en train de faire. Et ils ont des organisations, des points focaux dans la majeure partie des pays, des zones, que ce soit dans la région de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, l'Afrique du Sud, l'Afrique de l'Est, l'Afrique du Centre. Maintenant, nous avons un travail de mobilisation à faire et d'harmonisation pour rendre ça plus visible. Et nous espérons que vous tous, au sein de vos organisations et de vos communautés, vous allez nous aider à parvenir à cela.
Merci, Georgiev. So, Doctor... So, Doctor, this young lady asked a very interesting question. She says, what are the main barriers for women to reach the highest levels of power in Africa? What is your take on this question?
I think the voters, can we start there? Can we take responsibility for the choices that we make? I think if you're sitting here and you have voted in your life, ask yourself, which party did you vote for? But who was the face that was given to you to vote for by that party? It defies logic for me that of the 3 races on earth, we are the only race that in BCE already had matriarchies. Nubia had 100 years of matriarchy. That's in BCE. But we have produced only 3 women presidents, and all of them by default. Are you aware? In Malawi, because somebody died, Banda stepped up. In Tanzania, Magufuli was killed. Somebody stepped up. People say, oh, in Liberia, it was an election. No. The men had ran such a barbaric campaign of civil war, using rape as a weapon, cutting hands and eating human liver, child soldiering. It was such a mess, they needed a woman to come and pick up their nonsense. So even that was a default for me. Had there been no civil war there would never have been a woman president. So we should ask ourselves, the voters. Me, I always say it starts here. If you vote for a party that has been around for 70 years and never given you a woman as president, what are you voting for? Imagine the toy that is in Kenya now, and it's rightful in terms of taxation. But imagine if that toy Crystal was saying, we want a change of patriarchy, we want a woman leader. If fees must fall was so concerted, and the people were saying, we are tired of patriarchy, we want a balance, we want a woman leader. We don't protest on gender issues, except they are tied to something, to the fees, to the health system, to the education. When are we going to have a heightened toy that says down with patriarchy? It is not African. We've talked in so many platforms to say it's not African. I don't know how many times should we keep repeating this message to make it a campaign message. So the next toy I'm joining is one against patriarchy. Whatever else people are protesting against, count me out. I'm not in.
Thank you. I would like you, Edna, to react, and then we'll go to Professor, because this is such an important question.
So our SADC Parliamentary Forum conducted a study in 2022 in terms of they wanted to identify the main barriers that hinder women's participation. And the results revealed that what is hindering women from participation now was pertaining even a decade ago, except now the factors have been amplified with emerging issues such as cyberbullying, as well as other emerging issues like climate change and pandemics, and how they disproportionately affect women. So one of the barriers is social and cultural barriers. There's just this belief that women should not be leaders. And it's even present in religions where women are not given the chance to lead because of this misconception and societal belief, which already disadvantages women and limits their participation. Another issue is institutional, which relates to electoral systems, which I discussed earlier on, as well as gender quotas. And in some instances, these gender quotas are voluntary and not legislated. That means they are left to political parties or certain circles to determine how women should be given opportunity to participate and to be represented. Another fundamental factor is the issue of resources. Women are not taking up this position because they are economically unempowered. They do not have the resources. And even if they do not have the resources, if there's available resources in financial institutions, they do not have the capacity to go and borrow. So it's a double-edged sword, where you do not have the resources, but also you do not have the capacity to borrow. Already you are defeated, even before you can contest as a woman. The other issue is political violence. This is violence during elections, but also violence against women in politics. This violence is not the same that women experience and men experience. It's different. And women, ordinarily, we are fragile. So where there's violence, women will not step in that space. So already the space keeps on shrinking because of these factors. There's also a psychological and motivational factor. If my needs as a woman are not being taken care of, where will I get the courage to stand up and speak for other women? We are already defeated. But also there's a belief that women do not bring victory at home. So political parties see it as a risk to front a woman to take up a position because it's a gamble, because they know that at the end of the day, most likely the victory will not come home. They remain defeated. So all those barriers limit women's participation in politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, Professor Atia.
So thank you. I'm going to widen the conversation a little bit beyond traditional politics as well, because there's also politics in the workplace wherever you are. And we have an absence of women in numerous spaces. But it's not only just
boardroom.
about, yes, this is what I'm alluding to as well. But even while we talk about the absence of a woman in the space, there's also the absence of a woman who's a feminist in the space. So it isn't automatic, right? Oh, yeah, okay. I see we are resonating. But I was struck by this African proverb which says, when you strike a woman, you strike a rock. And it reminds me of the fact that there is this presumption of hardness, even though we talk about, yes, I didn't want to say that it's South African, but yes. But there's this presumption of it being, despite women being the sort of softer space, that we are a harder space. So there's this sort of contradiction, even within African tradition and society in which we operate in how people then deal with us, and then how we deal with others. And so when I looked at like this question about power, and if we just talk about politics as beyond just, political parties and even, governance issues, then what I see is two things. There's the housing of power in the people that bring that woman into power or not. And then there's the housing of power in the woman herself in the spaces in which she's operating in. And what you start to see, for example, is the challenges include ethnicity. Because sometimes it's not about voting in gender, it's about voting in family. It's about voting in clans, and it's about voting in, tribes. And this is a really big problem, not just in Africa. This is a problem in other continents across the world. So we should not feel like we are alone in this. This is a traditional trend across the world. The second is the issue of, which I think you already alluded to, which is fiscal or financial literacy. And one of the things that struck me in the research I was doing was that the women didn't really realize that they were going to need as much budget also. So if you're not clear on that in your workspace, then again you have that challenge in rolling out your vision. And then we come back to what you started with, that women are better users of money. We're better users of money, and then we get less money. So then we stretch it again, and we are exhausted again, right? Like it's a complete cycle. Yes, it's a vicious cycle, absolutely. And then it's the issue that politics is seen as dirty. And I think it's not only about the violence, it's about the corruption in the space and the unwillingness to be moving in that corrupt space and therefore sidestepping it. And so that also is impeding the ability of women to move into those spaces. But I also think, and this is because of feminism, I think low wages, I think the fact that women have so much unpaid care work to handle means that for a woman to make a decision to go into any kind of traditional political spaces, there are 50 other responsibilities they have to deal with first. Whereas if the man wants to move into politics, nobody's going to ask if he's looking after his mother and his grandmother or his disabled relative, anything. It's not even on the table or a question. And so it's these different dynamics in the household that women have to deal with before they even step out. And then if you look at the corporate spaces, the training of women in the corporate spaces means that they're actually now enablers of the system rather than, disruptors or rejectors. They actually have to survive in that system and do what works. And so you then don't actually have a feminist discourse taking place in those spaces.
Thank you very much. This was very important indeed. Yeah. Sí. Por favor. You speak English? Or please stand up.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
So good afternoon. I think I'll just have to sit down. Thank you. My name is Miracle. I'm a student at the Kenya School of Law. And my question is, especially to Honorable Shabalala, you speak of decolonization. It's a topic that I'm greatly interested in. And in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's, the mantra, we should all be feminists. You convinced me today to be a feminist, but then the question is, how do we convince the people back at home, the people in Kenya? When we speak of feminism, people view it as, it has a negative view. How do you change this view? How do you make the people to speak your language, even in governance? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are actually so we're going to take 3 questions just for the sake of time, and then we'll go to your answers.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Dolakbo from Nigeria. I work with the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion team in Christianity, Nigeria. So my question is directed at Edna. You spoke about political party financing, and then you spoke about how, okay, sorry, let me check how it should be incentivized. Okay, yeah, political parties should be incentivized. And so I was not clear about that. I don't know if you want to talk more about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one more for this round. We'll go back to you, don't worry.
Hello, hi, Lee Everts from UNECA. Thank you very much for the panelists for the great discussion. Actually, just have one comment, and it was triggered by you, Honorable Chabalala, of course. So you picked up where the previous session left off. You were talking about the microanalysis and impact studies for women, right? And I think this is a powerful area that we are constantly falling short in. The previous session spoke about GDP and how we have to include unpaid work, how it's not comprehensive enough. But I think we are selling ourselves short completely. That's too little. So I actually think we have to go a step further. So ask yourself, why have you never had a GDP by gender? Before agriculture existed, a woman and a man existed. Before manufacturing existed, a woman and a man existed. So why do we have more data on industries than we have on gender dynamics? Doesn't make sense. Why are we not collecting it? We have big gaps in statistics that can answer a lot of our questions. So, you know, for the purposes of illustration, let me say, if you had an inflation rate by gender. So previously, our moderator was making a very good comment to say females are disproportionately affected by various things, shocks, etc. So let's take inflation for now. We have inflation. It was out of control for a while last year. If we had it split by gender, what would it have shown? That inflation for women would have been much higher because food costs, etc., those are the bulk of our things that we have. And that would have showed you that monetary policy doesn't work the way it's supposed to work. So, I mean, this for me is, I'm loving the whole discussion, and this for me just brings up all the gaps that we have, and I think there are a lot of ladies around the table that can address these issues. So thank you for triggering that.
Thank you very much. So let's go to you, dear panelists. I would like to start with this very last comment. GDP by gender. What are your thoughts?
Oh, that's me.
It's a big one, yeah.
GDP by gender. Well, if we do not even disaggregate, my sister, how much tax a woman is paying, how are we even going to get to GDP by gender? That's why I gave a perfect example. A single mother who feeds 5 children, who is a middle manager, pays the same tax as another middle manager who is a mother but who has a second income. Because we deal with tax brackets, we don't deal with gender in taxation. Same in production, same in so many other things. So for me, it's a system. I think before we even get to GDP, we would have to look at trade, look at taxation, look at IFFs, the whole economic system. But then that brings me to what is neoliberalism? Because then that's the system we should be fighting. And I know of very few CSOs, again, because of funding, who will stand and say down with capitalism. I mean, I know of 2 at the moment. I haven't met others who will say we want a socialist inclined economy. Because however much we look at all these problems, the solutions we are giving, we are like people with leaking buckets standing at the tap. You fill 3 holes, but another hole comes. We'll get that gender, GDP by gender. We'll get that disaggregation. But after we get it, then what? We still have not changed the lives of women. We still have not changed entry into the marketplace. We still have not given women the necessary infrastructure, to perform. Why do I still have to wake up at 4 a.m., leave my child at a daycare center? Some children can't even open their eyes when they're dropped at a daycare center because their mother must still travel another 70 kilometers to get to work. Why is that not provided at the workplace? Why can't you take your child with you and the work has a daycare place? Why do churches have it, but they do not have it at work? So I think it's a good proposal. It's good that we work towards it, but I think I want to look at the whole economic structure because GDP pops up at the end. It's a sum total of the whole economic activity.
Thank you very much. And I think that our contributor also mentioned the fact that data collection and the lack of statistics for us in Africa is still a huge stumbling block, isn't it? Mm. And yes, please, I would like you to react to it.
So maybe it's about the underlying statistics. 80 to 90% of developing countries are informal. And the majority of the people in the informal are the women. And then you have the women who are doing the unpaid care work who are also in the formal sector. So what you have is a layer upon another layer of women that have been excluded from the system. And the problem is that since independence in most African countries, what you see is that the data is being collected is actually only collected from the formal system. And then they make an estimate, I call it a guesstimate. They make an estimate of what the remaining 80% should look like. And so this is like the complete underlying problem that we're now dealing with. But we can do an assessment based on household goods, on how inflation affects different genders and different types of family groups. And that data is available, and that data does show that women are disproportionately affected. So we can still get it But what I hear you saying is that what are the alternative systems? And I think for us, we cannot have money take priority over the human being that is supposed to produce that particular economy or resource. And so if you start there, the problem is the focus in GDP is on the interest rate. It's on what you're gaining from the money investment you're making. So that's like the whole logic. And so if we shift the logic and say, the human being, what is the human being producing? And what are we going to give the human being so that they continue to not only produce, but to produce more? Turn the human being into that economic unit. Then for me, this is where feminism finds its space. And this is where questions around, for example, they talk about human rights economy or socialism or the fiscal social contract. And there are numerous spaces where we can take an entry point into all of these. But I will stop with just one comment. There is an alternative data set being developed by the UN. UN DESA has developed something called the multi-dimensional, multi-variable index. And I actually think it's really worth having a look at because it sort of tries to rebalance the whole space as much as possible.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And now to you, Edna, because you had a very direct question.
Okay, so the question is on political party financing and how this can be used to incentivize political parties. So in my country, for instance, Zambia, political parties are not financed by public resources. They're self-financing. But there are other countries that are funded by the government or through the treasury. So the point I'm trying to drive home is that rather than the general approach to finance political parties, this financing should be linked to political parties meeting certain gender equality targets and outcomes. The financing should incentivize them to ensure that they're able to demonstrate that with this financing within their political party, they have put in place measures or affirmative actions that will ensure that women also get an equal opportunity to be nominated to stand as representatives of the people. I hope that is clear. So in a situation where political parties are not funded by the government, already you can tell that there's an exclusion of people, both male and female, but I'll stick to the female. There's already a natural exclusion because it means that if you do not have the financial muscle, it means that you can't stand because people who have money will be prioritized over those that do not bring anything to the table. So it's now becomes a game of resources for you to achieve the numbers. So that's the distinction between the two systems where political parties are financed by the treasury and those that are self-financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we have the last question of our first round from our self-confessed... No, I'm going to him. This is like the build-up. So we are going now to the question by our self-confessed feminist, right? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Who told us about the stigma that the notion of feminism still carries, especially, I suppose, when a man is trying to push that forward. And so he wants to know, really, how do we convince people back home? I think that's a very interesting question. And yes, Mam Diarra, I wanted to go to you because you are a queen in the art of convincing, I want to say.
Moi, je suis particulièrement intéressée par cette question de la perception sociale du féminisme, parce que c'est quelque chose que nous sommes en train de vivre. Par exemple, aujourd'hui, au Sénégal, nous avons des femmes de valeur qui s'identifient en tant que féministes, mais elles ont toute la pression populaire et toute la vision négative de la société sur elles. Et moi, c'est parce qu'il y a une certaine incompréhension et peut-être un manque d'information et de sensibilisation. Et ce gap doit être, on doit trouver un moyen de combler ce gap. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, c'est comme j'ai dit, peut-être on ne peut pas adhérer à quelque chose auquel quelque chose qu'on ne comprend pas. Et aujourd'hui, le travail que nous avons à faire, peut-être, c'est éduquer les populations sur le féminisme, parce que s'il y a quelque chose à y gagner. Et le féminisme, j'ai bien aimé votre introduction, ce n'est pas un combat des femmes contre les hommes. Moi, je pense que c'est un combat d'hommes et de femmes épris de justice sociale pour l'égalité. Et si on le définit ainsi et qu'on le présente de façon populaire ainsi, on va pouvoir convaincre certaines parties de la population encore réticentes. Un exemple. Souvent, quand on fait les campagnes sur l'accès, par exemple, à la terre pour les femmes, vous voyez certains chefs traditionnels, chefs de village, ils sont très réticents. Mais j'ai participé à une campagne d'accès des femmes à la terre où, au lieu de prendre les médias, de commencer en tout cas par les médias et par la place publique, on est allé expliquer aux chefs traditionnels l'enjeu et l'importance pour les femmes d'accéder à la terre et l'enjeu économique que cela peut avoir sur les familles et même sur les hommes eux-mêmes. Et cette année, et c'était très récent parce que c'était en 2022, pendant les 15 jours d'activisme, à ces jours, on a pu capitaliser 16 hectares de terre pour des femmes qui ont été validés et donnés par des chefs traditionnels qui, jadis, ne voulaient même pas entendre de la formalisation des terres à l'endroit des femmes. Donc, c'est une question de persuasion et que tout le monde peut-être, et aussi une question de bouche à oreille. Aujourd'hui, votre frère, comme mon frère, très réticent au féminisme, vous trouverez des mots inspirés par Honorable pour lui expliquer la perception du féminisme et l'aspect positif du féminisme. Et ce n'est pas une révolution négative, au contraire, c'est un retour aux sources parce que la population africaine est de nature féministe et matriarcale. Et si nous suivons nos valeurs traditionnelles et réelles, nous allons retourner à ce féminisme-là.
Waouh, le féminisme, c'est un retour aux sources. C'est très fort. C'est très fort et finalement, c'est ce que Honorable nous a chanté tout à l'heure en lisant la longue lignée de ces femmes de pouvoir et d'exception et finalement un retour aux sources. C'est vraiment très très fort. Est-ce que vous aimeriez ajouter quelque chose avant que l'on passe au deuxième round de questions sur cette question de comment, non? Okay, so let's go to audiences. So yeah, we have one question, two, and then three at the back. Okay, someone is going to bring you... oui, très bien.
Ok, posso falar em português?
Sim, sim, pode.
Ok, obrigada. Bom, eu chamo-me Brenda Campos, sou moçambicana, né? E não tive a oportunidade de estar aqui de manhã porque eu estava num outro lugar, um outro espaço, uma outra conversa muito interessante, que era a nível da SADC, sobre paz e segurança. E quando cheguei aqui, senti-me muito mais confortável. Lá não tem mulheres. E isso me trouxe essa análise, né? No espaço está-se a discutir paz e segurança, parece que é um show de homens. E ficou muito boring para mim e eu acabei vindo para aqui e eu percebi também esta questão de onde nós estamos e por que nós estamos em certos lugares. Então só queria trazer essa diferença, né, dos lugares. E talvez aqui estejamos a falar com convertidas, não é? Talvez isso também de falar num espaço em que todas nós estamos alinhadas em termos do que queremos, por que queremos. Por vezes estamos a falar com as pessoas já convertidas. E eu vou agora colocar as minhas questões. Eu estava atenta ao painel e, ouvindo tudo o que estavam a dizer no painel, eu fiquei assim, peraí, o que estão a dizer é o que eu já tenho ouvido há muito tempo. São os tais obstáculos, são os tais problemas que todos nós muito bem conhecemos. Um sistema que não está preparado e estruturado para nós, não é? Normas culturais que não estão preparadas para nós, sistemas políticos que tendem a nos afastar, ou que se nos colocam no poder, não é? Através dos partidos políticos que têm esses sistemas de colocar a mulher lá embaixo, não é? Nunca vamos chegar ao poder, mas se nós atingirmos os espaços de poder, não temos o tal dito poder, estamos lá como figura de estilo, mais um número, e eu comecei aqui a me perguntar, cadê as alternativas? Eu quero entender quais são as formas que nós podemos, juntas aqui, não é? Falar e anotar para realmente ultrapassar estes obstáculos que foram aqui todos mencionados. Por exemplo, a doutora esteve ali a falar que um dos grandes barreiras que nós temos, académicas, ativistas, se nós vamos treinar os diferentes partidos políticos, podemos ser conotados. Porque estás a treinar o partido que está no poder, ou porque estás a treinar aquele partido, isto pode nos criar conotações, mas é importante. Então, como é que nós podemos fazer? Ela esteve a falar que no ANC tentaram isso, né? E é sobre isso. Qual é a alternativa? Como é que nós conseguimos, de alguma forma, influenciar partidos políticos de forma positiva, sem ser conotadas, mas também que possamos influenciar que estejamos lá no poder? A outra questão, para mim, bastante importante é a questão da representação. Desculpem. Já não basta, para mim, uma questão numérica. Eu não sei, no nosso país, Moçambique, nós estamos muito bem em termos de representação numérica, mas é só olhar um pouco depois da questão do número, das estatísticas, né? Este espaço cheio de economistas, gostamos destes números. Mas vamos lá olhar para a realidade social. Como é que isso, esta ocupação destas mulheres, ou sei lá, está-se a traduzir em políticas públicas ou coisas que realmente transformam? A Edna esteve a falar de sensitiveness, né? Gender sensitive. Não é enough. Não é transformador. Como é que isso sai do sensitive, do acknowledgement, né? Yes, they need some space, para algo que realmente é transformativo. E eu queria entender dela isso. A outra questão que eu trago para mim também aqui que estava a ouvir, eu contava a ouvir um colega ali que dizia que foi convencido a ser feminista. E eu disse, meu Deus do céu, agora temos o trabalho de convencer também as pessoas a serem feministas. Então, esta questão toda que nos colocam, para além de termos que lutar por direitos, por vidas condignas, temos que convencer os homens a serem feministas. Então, isto me preocupou bastante. Sobre, afinal de contas, estamos a falar de gênero, que já foi hijacked há muito tempo, e agora estamos a permitir também o feminismo ser hijacked. Muitos países, muitas organizações, sei lá, todas elas têm políticas feministas. Tem o quê? A Alemanha assumiu agora, né? Política feminista. Feminist. Virou uma palavra muito reduzida a nada. E nós não podemos permitir isso. Eu, quando vi o lema, eu vi Feminist Alternatives. E eu gostaria que nós, sempre que estivéssemos a fazer nossa fala, voltássemos a essa questão. What are the alternatives? Thank you.
Muito obrigada. Muito obrigada. Yes. We're going to take 2 more questions. And this last question was huge. So I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation. Obrigada. So,
thank you very much. Hello. Okay, I'm Joanna from Sierra Leone, West Africa. And thank you so much for the rich conversation from the panelists. My question is to Honorable Dr. Shabalala. And just to say, coming to this room, being here since this morning, you're already my hero. And also, I'm hoping to interact with you more beyond AfCoDD, but also in other platforms. But I was concerned on the question around your last statement around shifting, towards getting more women into leadership. And just to share, experience from my country, Sierra Leone, we've tried that several times, and I think you already mentioned in your statement on some of the obstacles that women are facing. So what we tried to do, having 12% of women in parliament in 2018, we managed to get increase to 30%. And how that comes about is really empowering women economically, getting them into the space, and then we pushing. So my question is that how do we balance, between getting women into politics as well as addressing the many of the challenging issues around macroeconomic policies that exist right now, which I believe they are barriers in itself for women to get into politics. Because you see, the men will be telling them, your position is in the kitchen. I got an NP that told my candidate that you are a caterer, you're not fit in the parliament. And how do we, because all of these issues around taxation, around debt, is really getting women to still continue to be at the back. So my question for you, And I think for all of us here is how do we balance and which one that we need to place like priority? Is it getting the women into politics or leadership position, or ensuring that we address some of these barriers that keep women aback? That's my question. I don't know if you get me. And also, what supports do you bring? And I know you're doing a lot of things, but I also want to learn from you. And lastly, quickly, my question is to Professor around the surge engagement with the IMF. I know you mentioned sending a letter to them. What are they saying? Thank you.
I think that was a very important question. I did wanted to ask it earlier on, actually. So we have one last question for this round, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure that I have a question, so I'm just going to make a quick request and recommendation, because two sisters have adequately covered the concern, and I'm just going to zero on statistics and data. And my appeal through you, Madam Chair, is that can the UN women and the UN representatives help us to get the data on women right? It's as straightforward as that. When you discuss debt, it's figures. The issues that affect...
I'm really sorry. Do you mind repeating your question, please?
Okay. My appeal is, can the UN, the United Nations, women, or there's the UN Women Wing, there is the UN Human Rights Council, when they fund other activities for research, my request is that can we focus on getting the data or statistics on issues affecting women rights? And this includes getting the indicators on the issues that we are still lamenting about 100 years after the concepts of gender and women empowerment have been introduced. Because we are not putting the right figures and the correct data to the issues, there will never be solutions. Because, Madam Chair, when you discuss debt, it's figures. The capital world relies on figures and statistics. Our statistics is still informed by the World Bank. I know my sister tried to touch on it lightly when she said there are class issues and class elements, but if there are no figures to it, we will continue to be talking and talking. But because, Madam Chair, I've been part of producing the SDG reports for 2 years in a row, and we are using the indicators, traditional methods, but they are all assumptions, and it's not clear statistics. We are not being serious about women issues until we put figures that say how many women are traveling 500 kilometers to leave a child at school and then go to that, and what is the cost element to within the household. And if we are to advance beyond, we need to get the figures, the data. Lastly, on unemployment, we want to gloss around care work and all that. The care work is work. So if we call it work, then let's have correct figures on it and let's claim that money. Governments will always go and borrow. And if we are to claim a share for women, we must have that. We say there's huge informal economy. We allow it to persist because we cannot count how many women are working at this market and how much money are they making and what costs are coming into their lives and what experiences do they go through. So this is my appeal that at the next round conference, can we have improved data focusing on women? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we're going to take one more question, please.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I am really humbled and honored to be in this space today. I'm not?
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. I'm really humbled and honored to be in this space today. It's actually my first time in this space. My name is Pt2. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm with the Southern Africa Youth Forum, and I also work with the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association Youth Network. So I have a comment and a question.
They're going to change your mic. Just 1 second, just to be on the safe side.
Okay. Am I audible? Yes. Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I'm really humbled and honored to be in this space today. My name is Pt2, and I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm with the Southern Africa Youth Forum, and I'm also working with the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association Youth Network. So I have a comment and a question. I really agree with everything that the presenters said around the issues of women being underestimated, underrated, and underappreciated, especially by the women ourselves, because you realize that as women, we don't really appreciate ourselves. I remember we hosted a Women's Month celebration series in March this year, and we were appreciating and acknowledging the efforts of women across the different spaces, women in agriculture, women in mining, women in climate, and all those fields. And the same issues kept popping up, that women, we don't really acknowledge each other's efforts, and we feel like whenever we see a woman in a certain position, we're like, no, she must have probably used some sort of means to get to the top. It's not possible for a woman to get to the top just like that. So we really need to learn, unlearn, and relearn on that. So my question is directed to Honorable from the African Parliamentary Network. So my question is, in your perspective, what strategies can be employed to ensure that women in power are not only present, but also influential, also authoritative and dominant in shaping policies, issues to do with resource mobilization and resource allocation as well? And the other question that's also tallying with that one is that how can we measure their impact beyond mere representation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to take one more question for this round and give a chance to our panelists to reply.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Mark Botomani. I'm a member of Parliament from Malawi, the chairperson of Public Accounts Committee in Parliament, and I'm here as Secretary General for AfriPac. Mine is not necessarily a question, but maybe a comment, since politics was reflected and I'm a politician. I like the comment that one of the panelists made to say that feminism does not necessarily mean women fighting men, but it is about harnessing the, combining the forces to bring about social justice. I think that's a fair comment, because the way feminism is understood generally is to say that maybe women are all up against men. Now, my colleague, the Honorable, made a comment about some women that have risen up on the continent to become presidents, and she said by accidental, and I agree with her. But I want to say that in most cases, and for the women that I have seen and that have risen to, to those higher places, they are mostly self-made. It is about themselves pushing to get to those higher levels. I know of Joyce Banda, the former president of Malawi, who you actually reflected. She had been out to do work that promoted women and that promoted social justice. So it was all about herself rising up the ladders against all odds. I have seen most women that are only riding on the favor of men, just men to push them up, rather than pushing themselves up the ladders. Now, when you come to political participation, in our democracies, mostly, like for example, where I come from, it's all about fair play. So if a woman is rising up to become a politician, for example, a member of parliament, she's got to show up and participate with all the structures, like for example, the primaries and political parties and all the way up. I have competed with women myself. in the 3 elections that I have participated. I have beaten them. I have beaten them because the level was, was actually put across so that each one of us should compete. And I do not think that I was participating there as a man and trying to use my masculine power to make sure that someone should rise up. For example, the last election I participated in 2019, I got over 9,000 votes, and the lady that I competed with got 260 votes. It's all because she did not show up, and I showed up, and we had to be equal on the ground. So my point is, we are doing this, and I am fully, as a man, I must fully support the efforts that are being put in place to make sure that women rise up. But women themselves must also have self-confidence, self-esteem, to make sure that they rise up. And men, I'm sure a man like me should be able to support those efforts. And together, we can be able to fight social justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. So now let's go to you. Dear panelists, there is so much. I hope that I won't forget anybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. With her? Mm-hmm. So, yes. Mam Diarra, I'll start with you, actually, and then I'll go round. Our sister mentioned that feminism is being hijacked. We hear it here and there, but what is actually happening to this word, to the word feminism? Is it, in your opinion, being hijacked? How can we really overcome the barriers? Because she did mention, yes, we've been hearing the same things over and over again. We actually know what doesn't work, but how can we finally see change?
La modératrice, moi je pense que effectivement, juste pour donner un exemple, en tant que Sénégalaise, nous avons eu certains progrès politiques en termes de participation des femmes jusqu'à ce que le Sénégal ait pu intégrer les pays champions en termes de participation politique des femmes à travers la loi sur la parité qui nous a permis d'avoir une représentation de plus de 43% de femmes au niveau du Parlement. Mais grande fut notre surprise de voir que seulement 4 femmes ont été nommées dans le gouvernement, dans le nouveau gouvernement, avec une perspective de changement systémique, de progrès et d'innovation. Ce qui est un peu paradoxal, et toutes les femmes au Sénégal se sont levées pour faire entendre leur voix, pour que nos acquis en termes de lutte féministe et assumée puissent être préservés. Mais ces derniers mois, les femmes ont tout entendu en termes de critiques, en termes d'insultes, en termes de discrimination. Et moi, ma position par rapport à ça, d'un côté, il faut sensibiliser, informer et continuer et déconstruire surtout. Déconstruire la perception sociale que les gens ont vis-à-vis du féminisme. Et pour ça, il faut une approche juste très pédagogique et expliquer les gens. Mais d'un autre côté, il faut rester courageuse et continuer ce que nous sommes en train de faire parce qu'on ne blesse personne. La participation des femmes, l'accès des femmes aux ressources, l'accès des femmes dans les instances de décision, le fait de réclamer une gouvernance féministe et des systèmes de gouvernance féministes et inclusifs, ce n'est pas un privilège, c'est un droit des femmes. c'est des droits qu'on doit restituer aux femmes, que ce soit en Afrique ou bien dans les autres pays. Donc, il faut juste faire face de façon positive, mais nous avons du chemin à faire et il faut rester courageuse. Et de façon institutionnelle ou organisationnelle, il faut travailler aussi sur les données. Parce que nous manquons de données pratiquement dans tous les domaines qui touchent les femmes. Quel est l'enjeu, l'impact de la structuration économique sur les femmes de façon transversale, mais quel est aussi ce grand impact des femmes dans tous les domaines de l'économie et dans la vie des nations africaines. Il faut avoir des données à partager, faire des études analytiques pour partager la réalité avec les populations, mais aussi utiliser des langages compréhensifs pour que les gens puissent comprendre et accepter.
C'est vraiment un point très intéressant que vous faites, que vous mentionnez, parce que très souvent, quand on parle de sensibilisation, etc., est-ce qu'on s'exprime vraiment dans un langage qui soit accessible à tous ? C'est vraiment très intéressant, merci beaucoup. Alors sur cette question de, ok, on a de plus en plus de femmes en position de pouvoir, mais il n'y a pas de changement réel. Notre sœur du Mozambique a dit quelles sont les alternatives, comment on arrive vraiment, donc pour revenir à ce que Mme Diarra vient de mentionner, comment on arrive vraiment à du vrai changement, à aussi voir plus de femmes qui se soutiennent entre elles dans le cadre du travail. Ou dans d'autres positions, en tout cas, de pouvoir.
Okay. Thank you very much. There was a question to the effect that these barriers have been persistent, and now we're still talking about them. Indeed, these barriers have been around for more than a decade, and now these barriers are recurrent, and that means there's a problem in terms of the approach that we're using to address them. That is why they're recurrent. If the approach was effective, probably some of them would have dropped. But the reality is that women continue to face these barriers, and that means that we must intensify the approach that we're using to address these barriers in order to accelerate participation of women in politics. So the question was, what are the alternatives? Even the little numbers of women that make it to parliament, and you're right when you say that we should look beyond the numbers. I think what we should focus on is the influence that those numbers have. Influence on legislative outcomes, influence on policy making, but also influence in terms of the outcomes on gender that are driven by resources. Indeed, you're right when you say that gender-responsive budgeting is quite common. But I think the common mistake is that we leave it at the budgeting stage. We do not go beyond at the point of allocating resources. But if we're going to achieve, if we want to tie resources to gender outcomes, we must finish the whole process. That means that throughout the budget cycle, we must track. We must also include the gender perspective from the audit reports that come from the Auditor General. That means we're completing a whole cycle rather than leaving the cycle at just resource allocation. The other point I would want to bring out is the fact that the women that make it to parliament, there's also an issue of political party loyalty, where there's the whipping system. That is the reality. And both men and women that make it to parliament, they want to save their masters first, even before they can save the nation. Because they're looking at the future, they're looking at retaining their seat in the next, after elections. That means that even the way they'll vote, if it comes to a matter of voting in parliament, their voting is not objective, because there's an issue of making sure that you remain loyal to your party. But at the end of the day, that means that there's an issue of disservicing the interest of the mass. I think the other point I wanted to bring out is the fact that I think the main frameworks, regional frameworks and continental frameworks, have recognized gender as a cross-cutting issue. Therefore, the alternative approach for us all is to ensure that even our approach to gender also is collective, and gender outcomes are tied to a multi-sectoral approach, which my colleague talked about. The realization that it's a cross-cutting issue is one thing, but also how we want to narrow the gender inequality should be seen through different sectors in terms of our responses and our approaches to achieving gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable. You had quite a few questions directed your way.
Yeah, I can summarize them. I think one was on how do women in power transform or transfer into transformative power. The other one was to be focused on barriers affecting women, especially macroeconomic, or in getting them into leadership. And your question also was, how do you win people back in Kenya? How do you convert them into feminism? And then there was also one that said, how do women translate into meaningfulness beyond just the numbers, beyond saying there are 30 there?
Yes.
I think for me, it all boils down to one golden word: decolonization. It beats logic for me how colonization was planned over 4 years, 1884 to 1888, the Berlin Conference, and they still had sub-conferences to review. They still meet annually under the Bilderberg Conference to review, by the way. But we Africans have decided that you sleep on the 26th of April as a French colony and you wake up on the 27th of April as a free African country, fully fledged. Where was the process to decolonize? Have you ever thought about it? We haven't decolonized culture. We haven't decolonized language. We haven't decolonized spaces. Even the argument from Malawi that the women don't show up and in Malawi everything is equal. As a woman, you must just show up is actually not true. Because in the house in Malawi, what is the reigning law? For all of us, because it seeped into our culture, it's something called customary law. Customary law was not written by Africans. Have you ever thought of it? The colonizer, both Arab and European, said that we are oral people. We can't read and write. How is it that the only written thing from the pre-colonial era is customary law? And it is the same from Cape to Cairo, from Namibia to Nigeria. It is the same. It's based on 3 tenets. The first one is that the man is the head of the house. The second one is that therefore the children are the property of the men, including the women. The third one is what the lawyers call the law of primogeniture. Therefore, inheritance shall be by the firstborn male. That's why during colonization, if your husband died, the property, and you only had girl children, the property was registered by the uncle, and many women were swindled. Can I break the bubble and tell you, customary law was written in India, the longest colonized people. It was transplanted into Africa. In South Africa, we even know the person who wrote it was Shepstein and his son, and we have even awarded him by naming a town after him, Port Shepstein. He wrote it down for us. There's a date and time when customary law was written. It is not the natural order of things. It is not synonymous with African culture. That's the first thing that we need to squash. I speak, read and write 7 of our languages in South Africa. I can tell you, I ask every African who speaks a fluent language, is there a saying in your language that says, an idiom that says the man is the head of the house? That thing is in the Old Testament, it's in Judaism, transplanted into Christianity, transplanted into Islam. And sadly, even a country like Eswatini, which we call a monarchy, look at their constitution, it says Christian. So for as long as we don't address the patriarchy in religion, which African women wear every Sunday and on Thursday when they go and pray, we shall not address patriarchy. It is in the household. It is in the mind, sadly. Because who keeps up FGM? It is the grandmothers who tell us, oh, the girls are peeing like boys. I'm listening to the sound. They pee like boys. It means they've not been sewn up. Who keeps up? I don't attend weddings. Me, I like personal things. I no longer attend weddings, Crystal. My friends are angry with me. Because what songs do we sing in weddings? That here comes the bride to wash and clean for us, to iron our clothes, to cook in big pots. My first marriage lasted 4 years. It was a recipe. It was gonna break after all. because I had traveled the whole night into some rural province in South Africa, nursing a child. And I'm woken up in the morning and I'm asked, where's breakfast? I answered as Kanyisile. I said, I don't know, I'm just like you. Maybe mug and bean, maybe it's a Wimpy. I also don't know where's breakfast today. I am as ignorant as you in terms of where we are having breakfast today. Because if we women don't want to put ourselves in the deep and start, because it's not our culture, men can get as angry as they want. This is what I call bastardized African culture. It needs to be decolonized. It's based on customary law, and it has never been ours. How have we produced the powerful women that we talked about here if Africans are inherently patriarchal? We are not. That's why religion is statutory. Because they know that's where they keep you women. That's why, in fact, the sad thing, and I must stop talking, there's even more women in the church than men. So who's keeping up patriarchy? Women, we must start addressing ourselves and leave the men. We'll get to them once we have liberated ourselves. Once we have freed ourselves from patriarchal domination. And here's the sad thing. If I am under patriarchy, when I look at Crystal, I see nothing but another property of a man. Because that's how I see myself. This thing works in race too. If you believe in race dynamics and you fear a white man, when you see a black person, you see that black person through the eyes of a white person. If you believe that you are a kefir and you are a nigger and you are nothing but substandard, you see every other African through those eyes. It works the same with gender. That's why when an African serves a white person in a bank in South Africa, they say, can I help you? They smile. And then you come and they chew bubble gum and they remember, I need to answer my phone. And they're on their phone. Then I'm not angry. I just say, okay, we need decolonization here. That's how they see themselves. It means that's how they see me. It works in gender too. So let's start with women. Women, you are at the forefront of this struggle. Liberate yourselves. The history of African women is so much. I mean, when I finish, even today, I was accosted by people, you didn't count so and so, you didn't count so and so. We don't lack women role models. We lack women who are prepared to translate them into reality. Start doing it, women.
I almost don't want to speak after that. But I'm going to talk about this from the international financial framework, and hopefully you will be with me. So take a breath. Okay. Can you hear me? You can hear me. All right. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, when I first started speaking and I was asked, what's the definition of feminism? It's that there is a recognition that there is inequality between the sexes. That's it. You can go into ecofeminism. I heard lots of different types of feminism. But let's just rest at the first step. If you accept that there is discrimination between the sexes, which is resulting in inequality, you are a feminist. Full stop. Just that. Now, if we use that as the measure and this entire conversation that we've been having, then we don't need to convince people. So I understand your reaction. You have to just understand if you see elements of inequality, and you have to take it forward from there. But I also want to talk about the fact of solutions, because you asked for solutions, and I tried to speak about some solutions. So at the international level, we do have the beginning of a tax. Are you not hearing? Oh, okay. Is that better? Is that better? Oh, okay. All right. So at the international level, we now have the beginning of a tax convention where we actually had to fight for 3 weeks to keep the phrase human rights in the convention because they wanted to remove it. And it was a battle that was raging across the world. Now, you wouldn't know this, but this is what happened. So when they finally voted on it last week on Friday, it was a sigh of relief for all of us who were working on it because human rights was kept in. This whole conversation that we've already had earlier about keeping the human as the focus, right? So we've talked about the inequality between the sexes, but there's also the battle to keep the human within the space. Now, in the international architecture that we've all been talking about, there is no international financial institution. if I have a debt as a country with the IMF, I go to the IMF for the solution because there is no neutral space to resolve the dispute. That is inequality. That is a feminist cause. If I want to measure the interest rate I'm supposed to pay, 4 credit rating agencies, all registered in the United States, are going to decide my reliability as a country. And then that is how the interest rate is set. That is inequality. It should not be 4 private entities owned by God knows who making that decision. And I would like to know if there are any women who own those rating agencies as well. But that is a conversation for another time. Let's move into private debt. If you are successful at paying off your debt, and you say have an 8% interest rate as a country, then when you go for the next debt, because you're such a good paymaster, they're going to ask you for a higher interest rate. That is inequality. And those are feminist causes, because every single step of inequality we talk about has a trickle-down effect to the person at the bottom, who is the man and the woman who is working and producing and then paying taxes to pay off the debt. So it is a full cycle. And if we have those conversations that we've been having from morning, then because you have to pay off the debt, there is less money for your hospital. So suddenly your cesarean section isn't paid for. And for me, this is when it is so important for feminists and feminism to focus on inequality, because when you look at health specifically, there are issues in health and nutrition that are reversible by using money. Maternal mortality is preventable if you're financing the healthcare system. It is preventable. So we live in countries where there are hundreds of women dying giving birth. But I will tell you that there are countries in the world where 2 women will die giving birth in a year. And that's only because it really was not preventable. So those are the statistics we should be dealing with. So that is one. Stunting, childhood stunting is preventable. It's food and nutrition. It's making sure our children get food at the right time, 0 to 12. That is an inequality issue. And in traditional societies that are patriarchal, the male child will get more than the female child. So that is a double inequality issue that we're dealing with. So these are all the issues at a global level that then trickle down to the bottom. So for me, it's about tax, it's about illicit financial flows, and it's about debt, and it's about creating a global financial institution where we have public data access, which somebody already spoke about. But we have to also make sure, we have to see who is the responsible party for the creation of the data. And actually, the problem is the same way we inherited suddenly in the morning, we woke up the next day and we were independent. We also inherited treaties that had been signed by our imperial states. So if you look across the African continent, often the double taxation agreements in place will be the one agreement your colonial state signed with your imperial state. And the answer is the same. Where do we pay taxes? With the imperial state. It's an inequality paradigm. And the only country that renegotiated treaties like that after independence were countries like Kenya. That was the only African country that renegotiated, and not a single part of the treaty was changed. So I don't even know if they realized what they were renegotiating, because they maintained the same clauses. So inequality has got so many layers to it, and feminism is right there next to it because it's embedded together. But there was one question that was for me.
Yes, I was waiting.
Okay, so the question on IMF surcharges was very interesting. So COVID happened. The IMF did not change payment schedules for most countries across the world. They did not freeze interest rates. So instead, what I was starting to see in 2022 was that by 2025, the countries that were supposed to pay a 1% interest rate were now going to pay 3% in 2025. So this is when I wrote to the IMF. And after having good, long discussions with wonderful civil societies, especially across the African continent, we were able to find as much information as possible. Now, the IMF ignored my request. So my letter goes directly to Kristalina, who's the head of the IMF. So the letter was ignored for a full year, but the civil societies were incredibly supportive. So 300 civil societies then wrote a letter to her asking her to answer my letter. She still ignored my letter. They then went to the spring meetings, and now 450 of them said, now they wrote to the board members of the IMF and not to Kristalina and said, why are you not answering the letter of the IE? And I can give you behind the scenes stuff, which I cannot say in public, but finally I got an answer, which basically was 101, that we put a surcharge clause in order to prevent countries from defaulting. And that was my actual question. If they're defaulting on 1%, how will they not default on 3%? So it still logically doesn't make sense, but here was the impact. I got feedback from out of the 14 countries that were initially liable for surcharges, that they were able to use the letters to renegotiate their debt with the IMF. So some of the countries were able to get off the list of surcharges. Some of them were able to get some moratoriums. They were able to set up committees that joined human rights and debt within national government structures to begin to make that link, right? That inequality link and the feminist link, which is so important at a national level. But these are hidden activities that take place internally to governments. So that started to happen. And then these governments also started to write to the IMF to say, what's your response to this? And we need to know what it's about. So this was activity that now opened up. And then I found out, completely coincidentally, because I met a board member of the IMF, who told me that the IMF have now set up a committee on surcharges to revisit the issue. But this is how slow the process is. We are now 2.5 years on, and next year, 22 countries are going to pay surcharges. So this is with this incredible pressure that we've managed to pull together and to put on the IMF. And I will put this into the context of the fact that COVID has destroyed all statistics. No statistics are making sense at all. And so we really need to make sure that that debate on statistics is front and center, but that it is domestic statistics that make logical sense and recognize that 80% informal economy, because that is crucial.
Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing this. And we have been asking, where do we start? What do we do? And you've given us a brilliant example of concrete actions. It takes time, but change can truly happen. I would like to thank you all for your contribution. And on the back of talking about decolonizing slowly, I just wanted to add the fact that a lot of our Francophone countries still have their currencies that is colonized, isn't it? So where do we start? Yeah. Oui, le franc CFA. Thank you also to you in the audience for your very active participation. And I did it earlier on. I'm going to strike again. I just want you to give us one key word when we think about women, feminism, power, politics, resources. One key word, and I'll start with you, please. Mme Diarra, actually.
L'exercice n'est pas très équitable parce que le fait de le faire avec le premier groupe, nous, on a le temps de se préparer. Et donc, pour moi, c'est momentum. C'est maintenant, plus que jamais, en termes de lutte féministe, d'adaptation et de déconstruction.
Thank you. It won't be a key word, but a sentence. For me, I think one thing that we need to go back home with is the fact that gender should remain a top agenda. Thank you.
I think for me, it's also a sentence. I don't know about the other two races. I can't speak on them. But here's the sentence. The African woman has never been the property of a man. That's colonialism.
See, I can't come after that. It's not fair. But my single word is trust. And I say trust because the only way we can build systems that are going to work for us is if we make the choice to trust each other and to bring each other into the space and to ensure that the spaces that we then develop, the physical spaces and the relational spaces, have true legitimacy.
Merci beaucoup. Wow, that was truly incredible. And thank you very much for leaving us with those key words: trust, momentum, the woman is not the property of a man, and the fourth one, which was a sentence? Gender remains a top agenda. Thank you very much, Professor Atia Waris, Honorable Kanisile. Thank you very much, Edna Kanguya, and Mamdia Handia Isobel. It was very, very wonderful to be in your company today and to be in this energy. And thank you all as well in the room. You've been fantastic. Thank you for contributing. So I just have a few announcements this evening. Please remember that tomorrow is a day exclusive for our breakout sessions. There are QR codes outside on the banners, so please scan them, and you'll have the details with the themes, the times, and the rooms of each session. And I really encourage you to sign up as early as possible so that we can confirm your participation. Also, on the way out, you have tea and coffee and a few snacks. Please take full advantage of it. And as for me, I'll tell you, well, we'll meet again here on Friday morning for yet more panels and more discussions. And I wish you a very pleasant evening. Bye.